go to the art crayons, as they're called. A really soft material, so you're not going to get a sharp point, but you can, fill in areas or, develop it in layers. But I'm barely pressing. I'm hardly giving any pressure to this as I make the mark, because if I give too much, what I don't want to create, what's happening here, is a really thick layer of drawing material. Because remember that ultimately, we've got to get this material through the mesh of the screen to the paper below. And if I build it up so thick, it actually will not want to print. And you also have to think, like, if I'm drawing with this color on yellow mesh, I can barely see what's happening, but I can also kind of start to blend these materials. They don't blend as much as the marker, but they do start to interact with the colors that they sit on top of. They're nice if you have kind of a drawing like this marker drawing and you wanted to, create some image that kind of sits on top of it, for instance, that's a little bolder. So let's try one of these colored pencils, or colored watercolor colored pencils. This is a Prismacolor brand. And again, not too sharp, that's super important. This is not a great brand. These are not super soft. They're kind of, average quality, but which means that they will make a mark, but I have to press a little harder, and I might have to go over my mark a couple of times to really establish, density in my material. But you would, again, use them just like you would use colored pencils, right, to build up tone and texture in that way. Now, one thing that really comes into play when you are drawing on the screen is the fact that this screen has a grain, right? Because you've got the filaments going both in this direction and then in this direction, perpendicular to each other. So kind of like drawing with dry point on an intaglio copper plate, there's a little bit of a pull to the drawing material, particularly if you're trying to be really tight about your drawing and press really hard. You'll start to see these kind of little striated marks because the pencil is kind of getting down inside of the mesh. Versus if I just draw lightly and kind of more fluidly, I don't have nearly that much resistance. But if I'm drawing a straight line, it's actually kind of nice because it really keeps it quite straight. Here, this is actually one of the Stabilo pencils, which is very similar, just a different brand, that I'm going to come in, and it's hard to draw with this piece of tape on it, but these are really soft. They're nice to draw with. I use these quite a bit. So we're going to apply some water to the watercolor pencils to see how that interacts with the drawing marks that we've made. So you'll want to have a variety of brushes on hand depending on what your image looks like, and I've just got tap water here, nothing special. And I can come in, actually I want a bigger brush, I'll use this one. I can come in and just lightly, I'm barely touching the screen, and you can see how it causes that watercolor pencil to bleed. And if I stir it up a little bit, if I agitate it, it acts like actual watercolor. Since my marks are pretty delicate, I don't have a ton of material to move around, as opposed to if I had built up quite a bit more watercolor crayon there. This way, maybe you just want to soften a line. It's a good way, it's a good material to use to do that. See, now this is a good example. The Prismacolor watercolors, which were the cheaper brand, they're taking more aggressive action to they're not really dissolving as easily as the Derwent one. So you want to use a better quality crayon. Again, other materials that we have to go over are the watercolor pencils. And these come in a lot of brands, and just like the they're called crayons. And just like the watercolor pencils, they come in a lot of different brands. And the better the brand, kind of probably more expensive the crayon, the more information is going to transfer from the crayon itself to the screen. So your watercolor crayons are going to come in a little sleeve, but ultimately you're going to find that they break apart, and so they're going to look more like this. A lot of times I take them out of the sleeve because I like to feel the material in my fingers more closely, or because I'm using them on their side. So you can see they're not that dissimilar to the watercolor crayon, but you can get a little bit of a thicker mark than you can with I keep interchanging crayon and pencil, but you can get a thicker mark with the crayon than you can with the colored pencil. And again, the more information, the more physical material you put down, it's going to print the way you see it on the screen, give or take. Now, every bit of information on the screen is not going to print onto the paper. That's why we can make ghost prints, right? So expect whatever you print to be a little bit lighter than what you see on the screen. And if that means that maybe you're drawing with a denser mark than you would normally, that would make sense. And again, just like with the watercolor pencil, we can come in with a brush and we can disturb it with water, and we can basically turn it into, you know, a liquid watercolor that does all the things that watercolor does. So don't assume that really subtle things won't transfer. They will, especially with watercolor. You get really good transfer with anything that's kind of liquid that then gets transferred onto paper. So I did want to talk a little bit about some alternative options. There are different charcoal, you know, graphite, things like that that can also be used on the screen. You'll want to do some testing. So this is just a regular graphite drawing pencil, and you can see it's just an 8B, so it's very, very soft. You wouldn't want to use anything hard. You wouldn't want any of the H's. Even HB is problematic. You want to go all the way to the end of the B line. So this, ooh, that works well. I like that. That grips the screen. So a lot of it's going to come down to testing materials, right? To see what you like the feel of. And there's definitely a specific sound with drawing on a screen that's different than paper that you'll start to kind of become attuned to. Just one word about anything with liquid on it, like right now, there's some water that's sitting on my screen. I'm going to need to keep this flat until that's dry. If I want to speed up the process, I can use, you know, a blow dryer to do that, or time.